Hey there campers, it's Mark here with Lessons Learned. I'm going to do a complete winterization of my Geo Pro Camper. It's a 19 FBS camper. And this time around I'm going to use air to clear out the water lines. Some people have mentioned they like to see how that's done, so I'm going to include that in this winterization. Of course, the other option to, as part of winterizing your camper to protect the plumbing, is to draw antifreeze into the plumbing. So I may do that as a separate video, but this time around I'll be using air to clear the lines. So I hope you enjoy the winterization of the camper. One of the tasks to winterizing the camper is to drain the water. And on this side of the camper, you'll notice there's a little label or sign that says low point drain. We're going to loosen those caps, remove them to let the water drain out. Here you can see that sign close up. And if you look just underneath the camper right there, we can see there are two drains. One for hot, one for cold, and we just have to remove those caps. You can see these caps are plastic, so you have to be careful removing and tightening them. Not a lot of force, just gently snug them and not too much force to remove them. If you check your panel, if you check the fresh here, you notice that it still has 2/3 full. So obviously we need to drain that tank. Notice on this side of the camper, near the water heater cover and the freshwater hookup and antifreeze hookup, there's a sign below there towards the bottom. That's your freshwater drain. So we'll also want to drain that in case we have any water in our freshwater tank. Looking underneath the camper, you'll see the freshwater tank drain. And we'll let that drain completely because obviously we don't want stagnant water sitting in that tank during the winter while we're not going to be using the camper. Here you can see the panel that covers the water heater, and there are probably variations on this, but this just has a little latch. You turn it halfway and it slides through that little slot, and then you gain access to where the water heater is at. So there's two things we want to do here. First, before removing the anode rod, we want to relieve the pressure relief valve. I don't think there's going to be much pressure in there. We haven't had the hot water heater running actively for a week because it's been a week since we went camping. So I'll release it anyways. You just flip this lever, and this lever, if there was any pressure in there, it opens this pressure relief valve and the water would come out here. We can see there's not any. I'm going to leave it open. And then I'm going to remove the anode rod, which you can see this is a 1 1/16 inch socket is what fits the one I have. And when this comes loose, quite a bit of water will come out because it's what's inside the water heater usually. But you can see this anode rod, and the purpose of this is, I think, instead of any corrosives eating up your water heater tank interior, this will actually take those corrosives first, and little by little this thing will eat up and you have to replace it. You'll notice it has, plumber's thread tape on it. So when you put it back in, if you don't have any tape left on there, usually it's a good idea to recover those threads with the plumber's tape and reinsert it. You don't need a lot of it. Good enough to go around there. There we have it, ready to put back in. I guess these setups are different, but what I noticed on mine is that this thing's a little challenging to get started by hand. But you want to make sure that it is threading by hand and that you're not cross-threading it, because you don't want to strip that out. So I usually try to start it by hand, and then there's a certain feel, when a thing is threaded right, you can feel it. Whereas if it's cross-threaded, you'll notice that it's quite difficult to turn in. So you may have to give it a couple tries. The other thing is the tape on the threads also makes it a little bit harder to get it started. There we go. So then we'll flip this pressure relief valve back to not being tripped. Here's a close-up of that anode rod after it's been inserted back in and tightened up. You don't want to over tighten it, just enough so it doesn't leak. Also, to drain the water out of the lines and the tank, the best, everything, usually open the faucets, and this helps the water drain more fully because instead of being a vacuum, now air can flow through the pipes internally. I'm going to remove this panel because behind it are some water filters, and we want to get all the water out of those filters and also the canister that one of them is in. Here you can see there's this one large plastic container that has a filter in it. So we'll have to twist that off. There's a tool you need to remove that. And then also, if you look down below, next to the pump, there's a little filter to the left of the pump there. And we'll have to also remove that and get the water out of that. Here's what that tool looks like. You can see it has these little slots inside the ring part of the tool, and those catch on to that plastic cover so you can loosen it and remove it. This should come with your camper. If not, you can order it online. It's kind of a tight area. I'm going to try to film removing this filter so you can see it's full of water. And so I always put some paper towels on the floor underneath because it's very difficult to take that out of there and not spill any water. We'll see how it goes.
Once you break it loose, you can remove that tool and just turn it by hand. And it may be possible, if you don't tip it very much, to not spill too much water. So if you use two hands, might go pretty good. I think because I drained the water out already, it's not full of water. And now there's a kind of a navigation out of here around these pipes so that we can dump the water out of it. You can see it out here now. Good that I've got it off. And you can see the filter inside of it. We'll empty that out. I don't really think a person can get the water entirely out of this filter because there's water absorbed into it. So my thought on the filter is during the winter, I'll leave that filter out and I'll put it back on when it's time to get the camper ready for next spring. I replaced it last time. You'll also notice these O-rings that seal up. There's one on the filter itself where it slides up inside the mounting, and then there's this O-ring that, you know, prevents this filter cover from leaking. But what I'm going to do, since this is fairly heavy, I can tell it's got water, it's not going to drain out. I've emptied this out. I'm just going to put this plastic cover back on, and in the spring I'll put a new filter in. So this small filter, I'm going to see if there's some way I can film it and also be able to get my hand in there to take it off. So here's a better look at that filter. It is the same with the other filter. You'll notice it has water in it. So we'll just drain it out. We don't want that water in there freezing up right during the winter. So you'll notice inside there's this part that's the actual filter. It's like a hard material, kind of a secondary filter. Since this is plastic, I've never tightened it super tight. Really just hand tightened it. So we'll also put the canister back on that was over the larger filter. And again, we're not tightening this down excessively. It's all plastic. It's got the O-ring to seal it. We'll check it when we set everything up back for the use in the spring. Make sure nothing's leaking under here. Just a brief comment or two about these water valves. If you decided to use antifreeze to winterize your camper, there's something you need to do. You don't want to put antifreeze in your water heater. That's going to be empty. You don't want to do that. So you see this valve here at the top? You would turn that off. And this valve here at the bottom that has to do with the water heater, you would turn that off. So you get your cold inlet and your hot outlet, right? And then to draw your antifreeze up from the antifreeze connection on the outside, you have to change this valve. So instead of the water drawing from its normal source, it draws from the antifreeze source. There's two connections on the outside. One is city water and one is to actually pump in the antifreeze if you want to winterize it with the antifreeze. So you have to remember to do this switch over, and that way you can run a hose down into your antifreeze containers and just draw it up with the pump. The pump will draw the antifreeze up and pressurize the system with antifreeze. But you do need to remember to shut off your hot water heater valves. You don't want to put antifreeze inside your hot water heater. So I'm going to put this cover back on. I'm not going to leave the cover off, while it's sit here in storage. This fitting is the key to using air to clear out your lines, to remove any remaining water in your lines. You notice it has a shut-off valve there, a little handle. On one end, we have the connection for our faucet to connect to our inlet water. On the other end, we have a connection for our air hose. One key thing about this is we don't want to go over 40 psi with our air compressor, and I'll show that. So we'll connect this air hose with the adapter to a water connection, to our city water connection on our camper. So now you can see I let the air compressor build up pressure, and the regulated pressure is 40. Obviously inside the tank it has more pressure than that, but this is the amount of pressure it's going to allow to go through the line. So now I'm going to go open the valve and let the pressure go into the air lines of the camper to clear out clear out the water from the lines. So here's that valve I was talking about. So I'll just turn the valve to open up the air into the camper. And now we'll go inside and we'll open up, make sure the faucets are open, and we'll make sure that water's coming out of the faucets. We'll run them until there's no more water coming out. We're also going to put our low point drain caps back on, because this will cause the pressure to go back inside the camper. And again, we're just going to snug these tight. We're not going to sit there and crank them very much. Camper, here's the kitchen faucet. You'll notice I have this all the way open. Currently there's no water coming out of there. see. You can see I've got both of those all the way open. Just getting air right now. And then also we've got our shower. So we're going to turn that on. And there'll probably be something, maybe something in here because I haven't had this on. And now we've got some water coming out of that one. We've got some coming out of the bathroom sink. And let's check the toilet. Initially we got some water when we opened the toilet valve. Now we're getting mostly air. And it seems like my experience has been the fixtures are the farthest away from the water inlet. Once you get those clear, then the others seem to clear up. So right now there's absolutely nothing coming out of the toilet except air. Here's the bathroom sink. Not getting anything but air now. Back to the kitchen sink. Nothing but air. We also have this exterior water. You know, if you need to rinse your shoes off or something like that, the camper has this exterior water. So we're gonna have to check that out. Open it up. Because it too, no doubt, would hold some water. So I'm gonna release that, turn it on. Yeah, we can see that has some water in it. Still getting some drips of water out of there. Okay, taking another round here. The toilet has air. There's no water coming out when I push down the foot pedal. You just hear the air coming out. Same for the shower head. The only thing I get is air. Same for the bathroom sink. Air only. Kitchen sink. Only air. No water. Here we are back again at the exterior water. Few little faint traces of water still coming out of there. It seems really to be dripping out of the head. It's mostly air. This is the last one that seems to have just a little bit of trace of water still in it. It's very little. So we're just going to pour some of this antifreeze in each sink. This way the P-trap can get full of antifreeze instead of water. So that's the kitchen sink. Do the same in the bathroom sink. The toilet. And then also in our shower. Going to use some of this plumber's grease to lubricate the seal on the toilet. Usually that thing has some water in it, you know, when you're using it. When you let off that pedal, it lets a little bit more water in so that there's water to keep it from drying out. During the winter, whatever's in the bottom of that toilet's going to dry up. So we'll put some of this on there so that seal doesn't dry out and crack. While we were clearing out our water lines, we ended up sending some clean water down both the toilet, which would go to the black water tank, and the other sinks, which would go to the gray water tank. So even though my tanks were empty before I did this, I've now added water to those two tanks. So I'm going to drain that water out. It's not offensive because it's really just clearing the water out of the lines is what went down into the tanks. As we're winterizing the camper, one of the other things we need to do is make sure we shut off our propane tanks, and we'll take a look at that now. So we'll just remove the cover. There's a top access panel. You know, your camper might be different, but this seems to be a pretty common cover. And so now that we have that cover open, we can see both propane tanks and the shutoff valves. So we'll get a little closer look inside. So on top of each propane tank, we have each individual shutoff valve. We'll check those to make sure they're turned off. We used this one on this side, the right side, recently in a camping trip, so it's still turned on. And then also on this setup, there's a selector valve in the center. This chooses between one tank or the other, and it usually there's an arrow, and that arrow is pointed to this tank right now. So I'm just going to turn it straight down so that it's not using either one of these tanks. So here's a close-up. There you can see what one of the valves looks like on the tank, and then kind of hard to get a good look at this selector valve, but you can see it here. If I turn it back to one side, you notice there's a little arrow sticking out on one side, a little pointer. That pointer is what's really choosing your tank. So I'm turning it straight down so it's not pointed to either tank, so that we wouldn't get any gas through the lines in case for some reason the tank was turned back on. Just showing you a view of the battery. I've not removed my batteries during the winter. I guess there might be some people who would feel the need to remove them and maybe clean the cables or something like that. Not had any issue out of the batteries just staying here like they are inside this case, but I noticed this strap, there's a strap, 2 straps on there. I had to take a straight screwdriver and slide in here and get this thing loose. It was really tight and it was very difficult to do by hand without any tool. So if you're gonna get into the batteries and you have a similar cover and straps holding it on, you might find it helpful to loosen that strap with some type of a small pointy screwdriver before you try to remove it. Now I see better how this little strap is designed. That's got those teeth that are gripping against the strap, and they actually spread apart a little. So you can actually pull those apart and the strap will slip out. It's not quite as bad as I thought trying to take that off. So we'll take a look in here to see what we have. So the battery, cables, everything looks very clean. Don't see a lot of corrosion or anything. Maybe a mud dauber nest, that's about it. So we'll put the cover back on. This camper has a vent for the stove. Notice this. It's just a little flap, and that flap just snaps closed. If you're winterizing your camper, you might want to make sure you shut that. It's not a huge opening, but look, if you notice, if the wind or the air gets under it, it does open pretty good. So to keep pests from trying to get in there, it's just a pressure snap in shuts. So you might also want to close that, any other type of vent you have on your camper to keep any insects from getting in. One other suggestion for storing your camper in winterization, you might want to raise the steps and keep them inside the door. It might seem convenient to leave them down, but I found that this last time around I'd left the steps down. It wasn't even winter, it was only like a month. And it seemed like it was the bridge for ants. And there were a lot of ants inside the camper. When I raised that step up the first time, fell out of the steps, and then they got into the cabinet, and we had an ant issue during that camping trip. We went and got some taro to take care of them. But my suggestion would be from now on, don't leave the steps down, even though it's convenient. So, as you know, usually if your door and your stairs are made in a similar way as ours, you have to open your screen door and put those steps up. And that way it's one less touch point with the ground. You still have the tires and the stabilizer jacks and the front stand for the hitch, but at least it gets rid of this as one more entry point or bridge for like insects to crawl up. You might also want to clean the top of your camper off, you can sweep it off, and any slide outs, you can put those out and sweep the top of those off. That way when you cover it up, you won't have any debris on there.
Well, just wanted to wrap up the winterization of the camper with a few other brief comments. You might want to remove anything in your camper that could be a food source for either rodents or insects. We have had a mouse or two get in our camper during storage, and they'll chew up things you might be surprised at. They chewed up some handles on some pans that we had in the drawers. We didn't really leave food in there, but they found those. And you might be surprised how they can get in your camper. These mice chewed through the expansion insulation they spray around where the pipes come in under the sink. So they chewed through that and got up through the floor of the camper. And so I sealed that back up, but you never know, you might get a mouse in your camper during the winter. And then another thing is the refrigerator. So if you forget and leave that shut, sometimes there's a little bit of moisture still inside there, and you might get some mold or mildew inside the refrigerator. So good to prop the refrigerator open and leave that open while it's stored so that you don't have that problem. And so I hope you enjoyed this video on winterizing your camper. Soon I'll be posting that video I mentioned about putting the cover on the camper here in a few more weeks. And also, if you did enjoy this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you have any suggestions, questions, or comments, please leave those. And if you'd like, subscribe to our channel. Thanks.